DualShock Back Button was released at the beginning of 2020, and it seems like everyone who reviewed it at the time had mostly positive things to say about it. So why review it now? Well, I think with these sorts of products you can't really know how good they are until you've spent some quality time with them. You need to become proficient with it across a couple of different games to really understand its potential and its limitations. If this is something you're going to be using for hundreds if not thousands of hours, then it's also important to know if it's going to last the distance. I've got about 50 hours of playtime with this attachment across a variety of different games, and I have some pretty mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it can give you an edge in certain games, and it is competitively priced for what it offers. But on the other hand, it's clear that this is a budget product, and because of that, it has a few shortcomings. Before we get into all of that though, I'll just give you a quick overview of what it is and who it's for. The back button attachment connects to any standard PS4 controller and provides 2 additional programmable buttons. These new buttons make use of the fingers that are normally resting behind the controller not doing anything. It's a simple and affordable alternative to something like a scuff pad, which can cost upwards of $600. Now there are other similar third-party products like the Strike Pad, but this is the first genuine adapter from Sony. So what's it for? Having 2 additional buttons that can be mapped to any of the existing commands can give you an advantage. A lot of games make use of every single button, including the D-pad, so quite often you need to take your thumbs off the sticks in order to press them. This may not seem like a big deal, but in games where every second or tenth of a second count, reducing the time it takes to perform a certain action can have a significant impact on your performance. Take something like Call of Duty for example. Normally, if you want to jump, you'll need to take your right thumb off the stick to hit the jump button. Using this attachment, you can move and jump at the same time. So not only does this give you more tactical options, it also allows you to react faster. The back button attachment doesn't just improve performance either. It could also be useful for people with a disability that restricts the buttons they can comfortably press. This may not be useful for all types of disabilities of course, but it does at least provide a couple of new options. Another nice feature, for reasons that I'll explain in a little more detail later on, is that it doesn't seem to have a noticeable impact on battery life. Okay, so on paper it seems like it solves many problems, and in practice it does. But before we talk about what it gets wrong, let's talk about what it gets right. The attachment itself is lightweight and reasonably unobtrusive, and aside from the additional buttons, there's no obvious sign that it's connected to your controller. The setup is a cinch as well. You simply hold down the LED screen on the profile you want to customize, and then cycle through the button options to select the one you want. It has 3 profiles, so you can have it set up differently for your favorite games, and switching between them is quick and easy. The buttons themselves are positioned where your fingers would naturally grip the controller, and are comfortable even after many hours of use. This is completely subjective of course, but I'd say that for most people it should feel pretty natural. The buttons also don't appear to have any obvious latency. Now I don't have an oscilloscope or any other equipment to test this accurately, but reaction times to me at least feel on par with the rest of the buttons. The attachment appears to work with other devices that can sync with the DualShock as well. Again, I haven't tested this with everything, but for PC, Mac and even iPhone, the additional buttons work as expected. Great, so it sounds like everything works as advertised, and at $30 US or $50 Australian, it's about the cheapest solution currently on the market. What doesn't it do well then? Well, first off, connecting it feels like you're going to break the damn thing in half. You have to kind of awkwardly angle the connector down at the same time as you push it in. You have to push much harder than what seems necessary too. Once it's connected, it's fine, and for many people you'll never need to remove it, unless of course you use a charging dock. Unfortunately, the attachment needs the port the dock uses, and I guess it either wasn't possible or they just didn't bother adding a pass-through for charging. Now you can still plug in a USB cable to charge it, but if you're someone who uses the dock all the time like I do, then this isn't great. You do still get access to the 3.5mm microphone port for using a wired headset though. I've heard some reports of this port adding white noise or feedback to the connected headset, but I've tested it with a couple of different headphones and I haven't noticed any kind of interference. This may largely depend on the type of equipment you're using though. Although the extra buttons work really well with something like Call of Duty, this isn't true for every game. Remember how I said they were reasonably unobtrusive? Well, I play a lot of Street Fighter and this attachment seems like it would be a perfect fit. The problem is that it tends to get in the way and I constantly hit the extra buttons by accident. The only way I've found to get around this is to hold the pad differently, and this just makes things much harder. Of course, this doesn't mean that you'll have the same experience, but it does highlight both the potentially steep learning curve and how its comfort level is very subjective. Another disadvantage, depending on the types of games you play, is that the buttons are not analog. Racing games, for example, often use the L2 and R2 buttons to give you more control over the brake and throttle. The back buttons are useless for this because they only have an on or an off state, there's nothing in between. So if you were hoping for some additional pedal choices, then you're out of luck. They do work quite nicely as paddle shifters though. Finally, and this isn't really a con, more of a heads up, I mentioned that there's a bit of a learning curve involved, and while it isn't steep with every game, don't expect to simply slap on the back button attachment and instantly start wrecking faces. If you haven't used back buttons or triggers like this before, then building up the muscle memory needed to maximize its potential is going to take time. You'll also need to wrap your brain around the new button mapping with each game, so be prepared to put in some practice before the attachment starts to pay off. While the performance in-game is generally good, the experience outside leaves a lot to be desired, and it's clear that in order to keep the costs down, certain corners were cut. My guess is that this is a bit of an experiment to gauge interest in similar products such as an official Pro Pad or even the PS5's controller. Issues aside though, I haven't had any problems with reliability or build quality. It feels the same after 50 hours as it did when it came out of the box, and aside from the janky connection process, it hasn't had any technical hiccups. If you're looking for a cheap alternative to a Pro Pad that gives you a competitive advantage and you're happy to work around its limitations, then I can recommend it. For everyone else though, I'd say it might be more hassle than it's worth. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching and bye.